I think Urban Meyer needs to get his lies straight. He needs to make up his mind. I thought exceptional interview by Tom Rinaldi, as always. Exceptional commentary by Paul Feinbaum, as always, when he alluded to the fourth iteration of his story. Complete, flat-out denials. And then all of a sudden, you know, you got the press conference. You look like you had to be forced to be up there. You're talking about what breaks your heart about Courtney Smith, clearly a woman that you've never reached out to and called to have a conversation about it. You talked about keeping a family stabilized, but you never communicated with both. You communicated with him, the person that happens to be the grandson to the individual that was your mentor in Earl Bruce, who you love so dearly, which is why you initially justified keeping him on board, because you felt like you owed it to your mentor, because this was his grandson. So which one is it? It doesn't make any sense. What it comes down to is that Urban Meyer came across as an individual that didn't care enough. And this coming from me is a big deal in this respect. I was never of the mindset, and I have never been of the mindset, that a person needs to be held more culpable than the actual culprit. Zach Smith, his coach that he ended up firing, is the one who allegedly engaged in domestic violence. He's denied it, but few people believe him at this point in time. But he is the villain, because he is the one that came across, and if you listen to some of the reports, damn near terrorizing his now ex-wife. Yeah. Urban Meyer didn't do that, but Urban Meyer, having the power and the cachet that he has and choosing to handle it the way that he did publicly, and the message that he was willing to disseminate was so irresponsible that you question whether or not this man should be a leader of men. And that is what this comes down
Max,
to.
I just want to say one thing really quickly, and I take no pleasure in saying this, but every time he speaks now and opens his mouth, I lose more and more respect for him. The fact that he said that he was unclear, that Courtney Smith felt like the perpetrator was being protected, not her, the victim, the abuser. He was unaware of that. I mean, come on, dude.
Well, look, only Urban Meyer knows why he gave the interview. But let me tell you what it looks like, the reasons look like from where I'm sitting, okay? What I can infer from it.
Okay.
Looks like damage control by Urban Meyer in Ohio State. Because the way they handled that press conference, when they didn't release the findings, all the findings of the investigative panel until after the press conference, therefore reporters were not equipped to ask the kinds of questions they might have been had they got it ahead of time. The fact that they seemed to get away with a suspension that, what's the lowest suspension, the least amount of damage we can do while placating people, 3 games. The fact that he's still coaching practices, essentially. The fact that 3 current Ohio State University trustees were on the investigative panel. Stephen A., I said at the time, we debated it, you know, I don't like that. It appears to be a conflict of interest. The fact that he seemed not contrite, that he lacked remorse, that he never, even when given the chance, apologized to Courtney Smith during the press conference, they now feel, because he's about to come back, that they need to do some damage control. They got to put him on TV and do some damage control. Because did we learn anything new from this? No. We saw a guy who doesn't seem to think he did anything wrong necessarily. Now he's at the point where, well, if I look back at it, maybe, but the appearance is that he's having to jump through these hoops to do damage control now for himself and the university.
Here's the deal. Here's the part that everybody needs to pay attention to. Yes, it's damage control. Yes, there's absolutely no excuse that he has not called up, particularly considering what he has said since the press conference. But I go back to being a leader of men. When Urban Meyer has spoken about domestic violence in the past, he has been dogged in disseminating the message that he is completely against it. It would be a no-tolerance policy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What we saw here is that you mean towards the players, not necessarily towards the coaches, particularly one of your guys who happens to be the grandson of your mentor. That's the issue here. Because if this were one of the players, I promise you, Urban Meyer would not be in this situation. If this were a player, even though there were 31 arrests when he was at Florida, and even though you had some issues there, what have you, you know that a player would have been thrown to the wolves. So now we get into a bigger societal issue, because we're talking about players, individuals that don't possess the level of power, cachet, influence, etc., that a coach has. And you would throw them to the wolves, but a coach gets saved. That's the problem here. We are sitting here and we are living in an age where we're witnessing before our very eyes that 19, 20-year-olds, rife with ignorance, no doubt, some of them, are held more accountable than grown adults who are in positions of power and being not only believed to know better, they're being paid because the presumption is they do know better, when in fact, they don't act that way. We have to hold them accountable for that reason. This man is a phenomenal coach. I would want Urban Meyer coaching my team any day if we're just talking about football. But if we're talking about leading young men, that's the question here. And that is the stuff that needs to be focused on. That's what you're saying, essentially. That's what Max is saying. That's what we're all talking about here. Because if you address things the right way, then we're not questioning you being a leader of men. Yeah. And we're all right. That's the problem.
Every press conference, every time he gets in front of reporters, things just get worse. I don't understand
because we find out that there's an additional lie on top of the previous lies.
It's hard to keep up with all the lies.
And it's hard to keep up with them.